Good evening and welcome back to Cecilia. You might think that there was little that could go worse, but stay tuned. It's all getting... well, it's getting, yes, quite. Chapter 3. A Summons. Cecilia's earliest care, almost at break of day, was to send to the Grove. From thence she heard nothing but evil. Mr. Monckton was still alive, but with little or no hope of recovery, constantly delirious, and talking of Miss Beverley and her being married to young Delvile. Cecilia, who knew well this, at least, was no delirium, though shocked that he talked of it, hoped his danger less than was apprehended. The next day, however, more fatal news was brought her, though not from the quarter she expected it. Mr. Monckton, in one of his raving fits, had sent for Lady Margaret to his bedside, and used her almost inhumanly. He had railed at her age and infirmities with incredible fury, called her the cause of all his sufferings, and accused her as the immediate agent of Lucifer in his present wound and danger. Lady Margaret, whom neither jealousy nor malignity had cured of loving him, was dismayed and affrighted, and in hurrying out of the room upon his attempting in his frenzy to strike her, she dropped down dead in an apoplectic fit. Good heaven, thought Cecilia, what an exemplary punishment has this man! He loses his hated wife at the very moment when her death could no longer answer his purposes. Poor Lady Margaret! Her life has been as bitter as her temper, married from a view of interest, ill-used as a bar to happiness, and destroyed from the fruitless ravings of despair. She wrote all this intelligence to Ostend, whence she received a letter from Delvile, acquainting her he was detained from proceeding further by the weakness and illness of his mother, whose sufferings from sea-sickness had almost put an end to her existence. Thus passed a miserable week. Monckton still merely alive, Delvile detained at Ostend, and Cecilia tortured alike by what was recently past, actually present and fearfully expected, when one morning she was told a gentleman upon business desired immediately to speak with her. She hastily obeyed the summons. The constant image of her own mind, Delvile being already present to her, and 1,000 wild conjectures upon what had brought him back, rapidly occurring to her. Her expectations, however, were ill answered, for she found an entire stranger, an elderly man, of no pleasant aspect or manners. She desired to know his business. "I presume you, madam, are the lady of this house?" She bowed an assent. "May I take the liberty, madam, to ask your name?" "My name, sir?" "You will do me the favour, madam, by telling it me." "Is it possible you are come hither without already knowing it?" "I know it only by common report, madam." "Common report, sir, I believe is seldom wrong in a matter where to be right is so easy." "Have you any objection, madam, to telling me your name?" "No, sir, but your business can hardly be very important, if you are yet to learn whom you are to address. It will be time enough, therefore, for us to meet when you are elsewhere satisfied on this point." She would then have left the room. "I beg, madam," cried the stranger, "you will have patience. It is necessary, before I can open my business, that I should hear your name from yourself." "Well, sir," cried she with some hesitation, "you can scarce have come to this house without knowing that its owner is Cecilia Beverley." "That, madam, is your maiden name." "My maiden name?" cried she, starting. "Are you not married, madam?" "Married, sir?" she repeated, while her cheeks were the colour of scarlet. "It is properly, therefore, madam, the name of your husband that I mean to ask." "And by what authority, sir," cried she, equally astonished and offended, "do you make these extraordinary inquiries?" "I am deputed, madam, to wait upon you by Mr. Eggleston, the next heir to this estate, by your uncle's will, if you die without children, or change your name when you marry. His authority of inquiry, madam, I presume you will allow, and he has vested it in me by a letter of attorney." Cecilia's distress and confusion were now unspeakable. She knew not what to own or deny, she could not conjecture how she had been betrayed, and she had never made the smallest preparation against such an attack. "Mr. Eggleston, madam," he continued, "has been pretty credibly informed that you are actually married. He is very desirous, therefore, to know what are your intentions. for your continuing to be called Miss Beverley, as if still single, leaves him quite in the dark. But as he is so deeply concerned in the affair, he expects, as a lady of honour, you will deal with him without prevarication." "This demand, sir," said Cecilia, stammering, "is so extremely, so little expected." "The way, madam, in these cases is to keep pretty closely to the point. Are you married or are you not?" Cecilia, quite confounded, made no answer. To disavow her marriage when thus formally called upon was every way unjustifiable. To acknowledge it in her present situation would involve her in difficulties innumerable. "This is not, madam, a slight thing. Mr. Eggleston has a large family and a small fortune, and that into the bargain very much encumbered. It cannot therefore be expected that he will knowingly connive at cheating himself, by submitting to your actually being married and still enjoying your estate, though your husband does not take your name." Cecilia, now summoning more presence of mind, answered, "Mr. Eggleston, sir, has at least nothing to fear from imposition. Those with whom he has or may have any transactions in this affair are not accustomed to practice it." "I am far from meaning any offence, madam. My commission for Mr. Eggleston is simply this: to beg you will satisfy him upon what grounds you now evade the will of your late uncle, which, till cleared up, appears a point manifestly to his prejudice." "Tell him then, sir, that whatever he wishes to know shall be explained to him in about a week. At present I can give no other answer." "Very well, madam, he will wait that time, I am sure, for he does not wish to put you to any inconvenience. But when he heard the gentleman was gone abroad without owning his marriage, he thought it high time to take some notice of the matter." Cecilia, who by this speech found she was every way discovered, was again in the utmost confusion, and with much trepidation said, "Since you seem so well, sir, acquainted with this affair, I should be glad you would inform me by what means you came to the knowledge of it." "I heard it, madam, from Mr. Eggleston himself, who has long known it." "Long, sir? Impossible, when it is not yet a fortnight, not 10 days, or no more, that—" She stopped, recollecting she was making a confession better deferred. "That, madam," he answered, "may perhaps bear a little contention, for when this business comes to be settled, it will be very essential to be exact as to the time, even to the very hour, for a large income per annum divides into a small one per diem, and if your husband keeps his own name, you must not only give up your uncle's inheritance to the time of relinquishing yours, but refund from the very day of your marriage." "There is not the least doubt of it," answered she, "nor will the smallest difficulty be made." "You will please, then, to recollect, madam, that this sum is every hour increasing, and has been since last September, which made half a year accountable for last March. Since then there is now added—" "Good heaven, sir!" cried Cecilia, "what calculation are you making out? Do you call last week last September?" "No, madam, but I call last September the month in which you were married." "You will find yourself then, sir, extremely mistaken, and Mr. Eggleston is preparing himself for much disappointment if he supposes me so long in arrears with him." "Mr. Eggleston, madam, happens to be well informed of this transaction, as if there is any dispute in it, you will find. He was your immediate successor in the house to which you went last September in Pall Mall. The woman who kept it acquainted his servants that the last lady who hired it stayed with her but a day, and only came to town, she found, to be married. And hearing upon inquiry this lady was Miss Beverley, the servants, well knowing that their master was his conditional heir, told him the circumstances." "You will find all this, sir, end in nothing." "That, madam, as I said before, remains to be proved. If a young lady at 8 o'clock in the morning is seen, and she was seen, going into a church with a young gentleman and one female friend, and is afterwards observed to come out of it, followed by a clergyman and another person supposed to have officiated as father, and is seen get into a coach with same young gentleman and same female friend, why, the circumstances are pretty strong." "They may seem so, sir, but all conclusions drawn from them will be erroneous. I was not married then, upon my honour." "We have little, madam, to do with professions. The circumstances are strong enough to bear a trial, and—" "A trial?" "We have traced, madam, many witnesses able to stand to divers particulars, and 8 months' share of such an estate as this is well worth a little trouble." "I am amazed, sir. Surely Mr. Eggleston never desired you to make use of this language to me?" "Mr. Eggleston, madam, has behaved very honourably, though he knew the whole affair so long ago. He was persuaded Mr. Delvile had private reasons for a short concealment, and expecting every day when they would be cleared up by his taking your name, he never interfered. But being now informed he set out last week for the continent, he has been advised by his friends to claim his rights. That claim, sir, he need not fear will be satisfied, and without any occasion for threats of inquiries or lawsuits. The truth, madam, is this. Mr. Eggleston is at present in a little difficulty about some money matters, which makes it a point with him of some consequence to have the affair settled speedily, unless you could conveniently compromise the matter by advancing a particular sum, till it suits you to refund the whole that is due to him and quit the premises. Nothing, sir, is due to him, at least nothing worth mentioning. I shall enter into no terms, for I have no compromise to make. As to the premises, I will quit them with all the expedition in my power. You will do well, madam, for the truth is, it will not be convenient to him to wait much longer. He then went away. When next? Cried Cecilia. Shall I again be weak, vain, blind enough to form any plan with a hope of secrecy? Or enter with any hope into a clandestine scheme? Betrayed by those I have trusted, discovered by those I have not thought of, exposed to the cruelest alarms, and defenceless from the most shocking attacks. Such has been the life I have led since the moment I first consented to a private engagement. Oh, Delvile, your mother in her tenderness forgot her dignity, or she would not have concurred in an action which to such disgrace made me liable. Chapter 4. A Deliberation. It was necessary, however, not to moralize, but to act. Cecilia had undertaken to give her answer in a week, and the artful attorney had drawn from her an acknowledgment of her situation by which he might claim it yet sooner. The lawsuit with which she was threatened for the arrears of 8 months alarmed her not, though it shocked her, as she was certain she could prove her marriage so much later. It was easy to perceive that this man had been sent with a view of working from her a confession and terrifying from her some money. The confession, indeed, in conscience and honesty she could not wholly elude, but she had suffered too often by facility in parting with money to be there easily duped. Nothing, however, was more true than that she now lived upon an estate of which she no longer was the owner, and that all she either spent or received was to be accounted for and returned, since by the will of her uncle, unless her husband took her name, her estate on the very day of her marriage was to be forfeited and entered upon by the Egglestons. Delvile's plan and hope of secrecy had made them little weigh this matter, though their premature discovery so unexpectedly exposed her to their power. The first thought that occurred to her was to send an express to Delvile, and desire his instructions how to proceed, but she dreaded his impetuosity of temper, and was almost certain that the instant he should hear she was in any uneasiness or perplexity, he would return to her at all hazards, even though Mr. Monckton were dead and his mother herself dying. This step, therefore, she did not dare risk, preferring any personal hardship to endangering the already precarious life of Mrs. Delvile, or to hastening her son home while Mr. Monckton was in so desperate a situation. But though what to avoid was easy to settle, what to seek was difficult to devise. She had now no Mrs. Charlton to receive her, nor a creature in whom she could confide. To continue her present way of living was deeply involving Delvile in debt, a circumstance she had never considered, in the confusion and hurry attending all their plans and conversations, and a circumstance which, though to him it might have occurred, he could not in common delicacy mention. Yet to have quitted her house and retrenched her expenses would have raised suspicions that must have anticipated the discovery she so much wished to have delayed. That wish, by the present danger of its failure, was but more ardent. To have her affairs and situation become publicly known at the present period, she felt would half distract her. Privately married, parted from her husband at the very moment of their union, a husband by whose hands the apparent friend of her earliest youth was all but killed, whose father had execrated the match, whose mother was now falling a sacrifice to the vehemence with which she had opposed it, and who himself, little short of an exile, knew not yet if, with personal safety, he might return to his native land. To circumstances so dreadful, she had now the additional shock of being uncertain whether her own house might not be seized before any other could be prepared for her reception. Yet still whither to go, what to do, or what to resolve, she was wholly unable to determine. And after meditating almost to madness in the search of some plan or expedient, she was obliged to give over the attempt, and be satisfied with remaining quietly where she was, till she had better news from Delvile of his mother, or better news to send him of Mr. Monckton. Carefully, meantime, in all her letters, avoiding to alarm him by any hint of her distress. Yet she was not idle, either from despair or helplessness. She found her difficulties increased, and she called forth more resolution to combat them. She animated herself by the promise she had made Delvile, and recovering from the sadness to which she had given way at first, she now exerted herself with vigour to perform it as she ought. She began by making an immediate inspection into her affairs, and endeavouring, where expense seemed unnecessary, to lessen it. She gave Henrietta to understand she feared they must soon part, and so afflicted was the unhappy girl at the news, that she found it the most cruel office she had to execute. The same intimation she gave to Mrs Harrel, who repined at it more openly, but with a selfishness so evident that it blunted the edges of pity. She then announced to Albany her inability to pursue at present their extensive schemes of benevolence, and though he instantly left her to carry on his laborious plan elsewhere, the reverence she had now excited in him of her character made him leave her with no sensation but of regret, and readily promised to return when her affairs were settled, or her mind more composed. These little preparations, which were all she could make, with inquiries after Mr Monckton and writing to Delvile, sufficiently filled up her time, though her thoughts were by no means confined to them. Day after day passed, and Mr Monckton continued to linger rather than live. The letters of Delvile, still only dated from Ostend, contained the most melancholy complaints of the illness of his mother, and the time advanced when her answer would be claimed by the attorney. The thought of such another visit was almost intolerable, and within 2 days of the time that she expected it, she resolved to endeavour herself to prevail with Mr Eggleston to wait longer. Mr Eggleston was a gentleman whom she knew little more than by sight. He was no relation to her family, nor had any connection with the Dean, but by being a cousin to a lady he had married, and who had left him no children. The Dean had no particular regard for him, and had rather mentioned him in his will as the successor of Cecilia, in case she died unmarried or changed her name, as a mark that he approved of her doing neither, than as a matter he thought probable, if even possible, to turn out in his favour. He was a man of large family, the sons of which, who were extravagant and dissipated, had much impaired his fortune by prevailing with him to pay their debts, and much distressed him in his affairs by successfully teasing him for money. Cecilia, acquainted with these circumstances, knew but too well with what avidity her estate would be seized by them, and how little the sons would endure delay, even if the father consented to it. Yet since the sacrifice to which she had agreed must soon make it indisputably their own, she determined to deal with them openly, and acknowledged therefore in her letter her marriage, without disguise, but begged their patience and secrecy, and promised in a short time the most honourable retribution and satisfaction. She sent this letter by a man and horse, Mr Eggleston's habitation being within 15 miles of her own. The answer was from his eldest son, who acquainted her that his father was very ill, and had put all his affairs into the hands of Mr Carn, his attorney, who was a man of great credit, and would see justice done on all sides. If this answer, which she broke open the instant she took it into her hand, was in itself a cruel disappointment to her, how was that disappointment embittered by shame and terror, when upon again folding it up, she saw that it was directed to Mrs Mortimer Delvile. This was a decisive stroke. What they wrote to her she was sure they would mention to all others. She saw they were too impatient for her estate to be moved by any representations to a delay, and that their eagerness to publish their right took from them all consideration of what they might make her suffer. Mr Eggleston, she found, permitted himself to be wholly governed by his son. His son was a needy and profligate spendthrift, and by throwing the management of the affair into the hands of an attorney, craftily meant to shield himself from the future resentment of Delvile, to whom hereafter he might affect at his convenience to disapprove of Mr Carn's behaviour, while Mr Carn was always secure, by averring he only exerted himself for the interest of his client. The discerning Cecilia, though but little experienced in business, and wholly unsuspicious by nature, yet saw into this management, and doubted not these excuses were already arranged. She had only therefore to save herself an actual ejectment, by quitting a house in which she was exposed to such a disgrace. But still, whither to go she knew not. One only attempt seemed in her power for an honourable asylum, and that was more irksomely painful to her than seeking shelter in the meanest retreat. It was applying to Mr Delvile senior. The action of leaving her house, whether quietly or forcibly, could not but instantly authenticate the reports spread by the Egglestons of her marriage. To hope, therefore, for secrecy any longer would be folly, and Mr. Delvile's rage at such intelligence might be still greater to hear it by chance than from herself. She now lamented that Delvile had not at once told the tale, but little foreseeing such a discovery as the present, they had mutually concluded to defer the communication till his return. Her own anger at the contemptuous ill treatment she had repeatedly met from him, she was now content not merely to suppress but to dismiss, since, as the wife of his son without his consent, she considered herself no longer as wholly innocent of incurring it. Yet such was her dread of his austerity, and the arrogance of his reproaches, that by choice she would have preferred an habitation with her own pensioner, the pew opener, to the grandest apartment in Delvile Castle, while he continued as lord. In her present situation, however, her choice was little to be consulted. The honour of Delvile was concerned in her escaping even temporary disgrace, and nothing, she knew, would so much gratify him as any attention from her to his father. She wrote to him, therefore, the following letter, which she sent by an express. To the Honourable Compton Delvile. Sir, April 29th, 1780. I should not, even by letter, presume thus to force myself upon your remembrance, did I not think it a duty I now owe your son, both to risk and to bear the displeasure it may unhappily occasion. After such an acknowledgment, all other concession would be superfluous, and uncertain as I am if you will ever deign to own me, more words than are necessary would be merely impertinent. It was the intention of your son, sir, when he left the kingdom, to submit wholly to your arbitration at his return, which should be resigned, his own name or my fortune. But his request for your decision and his supplication for your forgiveness are both most unfortunately prevented by a premature and unforeseen discovery of our situation, which renders an immediate determination absolutely unavoidable. At this distance from him I cannot in time receive his directions upon the measures I have to take. Pardon me then, sir, if well knowing my reference to him will not be more implicit than his own to you, I venture in the present important crisis of my affairs to entreat those commands instantly by which I am certain of being guided ultimately. I would commend myself to your favour, but that I dread exciting your resentment. I will detain you therefore only to add, that the father of Mr. Mortimer Delvile will ever meet the most profound respect from her, who without his permission dares sign no name to the honour she now has in declaring herself his most humble and most obedient servant. Her mind was somewhat easier when this letter was written, because she thought it a duty, yet felt reluctance in performing it. She wished to have represented to him strongly the danger of Delvile's hearing her distress, but she knew so well his inordinate self-sufficiency, she feared a hint of that sort might be construed into an insult, and concluded her only chance that he would do anything was by leaving wholly to his own suggestions the weighing and settling what. But though nothing was more uncertain than whether she should be received at Delvile Castle, nothing was more fixed than that she must quit her own house, since the pride of Mr. Delvile left not even a chance that his interest would conquer it. She deferred not, therefore, any longer making preparations for her removal, though wholly unsettled whither. Her first, which was also her most painful task, was to acquaint Henrietta with her situation. She sent, therefore, to desire to speak with her, but the countenance of Henrietta showed her communication would not surprise her. What is the matter with my dear Henrietta? Cried Cecilia. Who is it has already afflicted that kind heart which I am now compelled to afflict for myself? Henrietta, in whom anger appeared to be struggling with sorrow, answered, No, madam, not afflicted for you. It would be strange if I were, thinking as I think. I am glad, said Cecilia calmly, if you are not, for I would give to you, were it possible, nothing but pleasure and joy. Ah, madam, cried Henrietta, bursting into tears, why will you say so when you don't care what becomes of me? When you are going to cast me off, and when you will soon be too happy ever to think of me more? If I am never happy till then, said Cecilia, sad indeed will be my life. No, my gentlest friend, you will always have your share in my heart, and always to me would have been the welcomest guest in my house, but for those unhappy circumstances which make our separating inevitable. Yet you suffered me, madam, to hear from anybody that you was married and going away, and all the common servants in the house knew it before me. I am amazed, said Cecilia. How and which way can they have heard it? The man that went to Mr. Eggleston brought the first news of it, for he said all the servants have talked of nothing else, and that their master was to come and take possession here next Thursday. Cecilia started at this most unwelcome intelligence. "Yet you envy me," she cried. "Henrietta, though I am forced from my house, though I am in quitting it I am unprovided with any other, and though him for whom I relinquish it is far off, without means of protecting or power of returning to me." "But you are married to him, madam," cried she expressively. "True, my love, but also I am parted from him." "Oh, how differently," exclaimed Henrietta, "do the great think from the little! Were I married, and so married, I should want neither house, nor fine clothes, nor riches, nor anything. I should not care where I lived. Every place would be paradise. I would walk to him barefoot if he were 1,000 miles off, and I should mind nobody else in the world while I had him to take care of me." "Ah, Delvile," thought Cecilia, "what powers of fascination are yours! Should I be tempted to repine at what I have to bear, I will think of this heroic girl and blush." Mrs Harrel now broke in upon them, eager to be informed of the truth or falsehood of the reports which buzzed throughout the house. Cecilia briefly related to them both the state of her affairs, earnestly expressing her concern at the abrupt separation which must take place, and for which she had been unable to prepare them, as the circumstances which led to it had been wholly unforeseen by herself. Mrs Harrel listened to the account with much curiosity and surprise, but Henrietta wept incessantly in hearing it. The object of a passion ardent as it was romantic, lost to her past recovery, torn herself, probably for ever, from the best friend she had in the world, and obliged to return thus suddenly to a home she detested. Henrietta possessed not the fortitude to hear evils such as these, which to her inexperienced heart appeared the severest that could be inflicted. This conversation over, Cecilia sent for her steward, and desired him, with the utmost expedition, to call in all her bills, and instantly to go round to her tenants within 20 miles, and gather in from those who were able to pay the arrears now due to her, charging him, however, upon no account to be urgent with such as seemed distressed. The bills she had to pay were collected without difficulty. She never owed much, and creditors are seldom hard of access. But the money she hoped to receive fell very short of her expectations, for the indulgence she had shown to her tenants had ill prepared them for so sudden a demand. Follow the money, folks. Follow the money. Have any of you thought of what would happen to Cecilia's income and her inheritance if she were to give it up? It has to go somewhere. Follow the money. It's all about the money. Have a good evening.